She was on my porch on a September afternoon that smelled like cut grass and distant barbecue, 1 year to the day since I walked away and taught myself how to sleep without checking the door twice. Her mascara had bled into delicate tributaries that made her look like a watercolor left in the rain. She clutched her tote the way people on late-night talk radio clutch their last conspiracy, as if inside it there might be an instruction manual for how to rewind a life. I stood in the doorway and listened to the clatter of a neighbor's skateboard, the low drone of a passing mower, America being America on a weekend, and I told myself this was not a test, not a trap, not a pilot episode for one of those family drama stories that eat your entire fall schedule. She said my name the way a church bell says noon. I answered the way a courthouse says, next case. I had practiced this scene in the quiet gym mornings when the floor smelled like disinfectant and second chances. In the practice version, I was eloquent. In the practice version, I was an oak tree, unshakable, giving shade to nothing but the truth. Real life never shows up with the script you wrote in your head. She said she was sorry, and 1,000 ghosts that looked like wedding photos, museum tickets, and laundry day arguments rose out of the porch boards and stood around us, listening. She said it had all fallen apart. She said the man who had whispered to her that he was a different kind of future was in fact the oldest kind of past. She cried, then hiccuped the way our dog used to after stealing carrot sticks. I never knew grief could sound like someone trying to swallow a paperclip. I told her there was water inside, and she nodded. I did not invite her to sit, but she sat anyway, on the couch I bought after the divorce, the one that looks like something an honest therapist would recommend. She looked around the room at the small certainties I had earned. A framed 5K medal, a plant that had learned how to trust me, shelves where books leaned into one another like veterans who know which nights to talk and which nights to keep quiet. She said she was not here to destroy anything. She said she had already destroyed enough. She said she had read 1,000 revenge stories and betrayal stories online and learned that punishment is not a place, but a clock. I pictured late-night glow on her face while she scrolled through Reddit stories and relationship stories where anonymous narrators clutch their dignity like a flashlight in a storm. I pictured her typing into that ocean and the ocean answering, and none of it helping with the actual weather inside her chest. I did not tell her about the new way my mornings begin, with coffee that tastes like accountability and a run that feels like a border patrol between old habits and new citizenship. I did not tell her that some nights I still hear the sound of a bedroom door closing, and it is the loudest thing in the county. I did not tell her that people handed me phrases like family revenge and infidelity stories as if they were coat hooks for a life I never wanted to hang. Instead, I asked her what happened, using a voice that had learned the slow arithmetic of boundaries. She told me haltingly about the apartment with the rooftop view, the promises that came with canapes and playlists, the way the other man loved drama nearly as much as he loved being the main character in it. She told me about passwords changed, money missing, a secret phone, a hidden anger that had slept like a crocodile under a dock. She told me about a shouting match that moved from kitchen to hallway to sidewalk, and how neighbors watched from blinds like loyal subscribers to a channel called Family Drama Live. She told me about the morning she woke up in a borrowed hoodie and saw herself in a stranger's bathroom mirror and thought, I am a knockoff of my own life. There is a moment, if you ever find yourself cast as the calm one in a storm you did not schedule, when you realize you have the clicker. It is not revenge, and it is not triumph. It is just the quiet knowledge that you can choose which channel plays. I could feel it in my thumb. She said she wanted to make things right. She said she understood if I could never trust her again, but she had to try, because the absence of me had turned the calendar into a haunted house, where every day contained a jump scare labeled my fault. She reached into her tote and put something on the coffee table, our wedding photo, The one where we are both squinting into a future so bright you would think it came with a warning label. I watched the glass catch the afternoon light. I remembered how her father had looked at me during the vows like a man trying to loan out a priceless car without the insurance paperwork. I remembered the priest saying, "Love keeps no record of wrongs," and how I had learned, painfully, that love at least keeps a ledger of lessons. This is the part where I am supposed to tell you I threw the photo into the trash and delivered a monologue that would go viral among the Reddit Betrayal Diaries crowd. A neatly punctuated episode of cheating stories or husband refuses to sign birth certificate or cheating wife gives birth to mixed baby. All those explosive headlines you see trending in the midnight courtroom of the internet. But real life is rarely the headline. Real life is the footnote that refuses to end. I told her we would talk, and we did. And by talk, I mean she spoke, and I asked questions the way a good documentary does, without agenda, just enough to let the subject tell the story while the rest of us hold our breath. I kept hearing a word my mother used to say when the sink broke or the car would not start: repair. It sounded less like romance and more like carpentry, less like fireworks, and more like screws finding the thread again. That night, after she left with her tote and her last hope voice, I sat on my porch until the mosquitoes petitioned to be recognized as residents. The neighbor's porch light came on. Somewhere in the dark, a kid practiced a trumpet scale that sounded like apology learning how to stand upright. I thought about how Americans love a comeback almost as much as we love a scandal, how our stories have room for both. I thought about the new man I had been building, brick by patient brick, and whether he could share a room with the ghost of a marriage that once thought it was bulletproof. I thought about the future as something other than a verdict. When I finally went inside, I left the wedding photo on the table, not as a promise, not as a curse, as a lit candle in a room that might still be safe to enter. The next morning, I did something unusual for a character in one of those family drama stories with a title splashy enough for the algorithm. I went to work. That is, I walked into the kind of office park where ambition and air conditioning shake hands, where the flag out front thrums like a reminder that all stories here are braided: personal, professional, civic. The front desk coffee had that familiar hint of cardboard hope. I sat at my desk and opened the spreadsheet that knows my middle name. For 8 hours, I made numbers behave themselves. I could feel my life holding, not the way a bridge holds while groaning, but the way a good backpack holds. Weight distributed, straps adjusted, journey possible. People ask what healing looks like, as if it is a montage with upbeat music and new haircuts. Healing looked like ignoring the itch to text her. Healing looked like going to the gym after work and listening to a podcast about how to renovate a house without accidentally discovering mold the size of Vermont. Healing looked like a stranger spotting me on the bench press and saying, "You got it, man," in a voice that made me want to apply for citizenship in the nation of You Got It. After, I walked home under a sky so enormous it made my worries look like small-town gossip. At my door there was no note, no pleading text. The silence felt neither cruel nor kind. It felt like a classroom before the teacher arrives. That night I read, "There are two Americas, the one in the mirror and the one in the browser. If the mirror America is chores and paychecks and laughter that smells like popcorn, the browser America is a coliseum with free admission and unlimited popcorn salt." I found myself sinking into threads where narrators in plain clothes tell spectacular truths. Reddit stories with titles that clatter like dropped pans. Relationship stories where the commenters wear judge robes sewn from empathy and caffeinated outrage. I read until my eyes felt sanded down. The stories were a wilderness of warnings and winks. Cheating wife Reddit, cheating wife story, wife cheating short story. Infidelity stories where the plot bends like a license plate after a storm. There were fatherhood tales like husband refuses to sign birth certificate, family stories that braided heartbreak with punchlines, family revenge fantasies that ended with someone learning the price of not listening. The names were always blurred, the cities always vague, but the feelings were in 4K. It would be fashionable to say I hated it, that the spectacle of betrayal did nothing for me, that I was above it because I had climbed some private mountain labeled growth. The truth is, I felt less alone reading those strangers who refused to abbreviate their pain. In the Rome of midnight, their paragraphs were public fountains. I knew that the same platforms that sell us outrage like carnival cotton candy can also pass around a bucket of cold water. Every so often a comment would land like a hand on my shoulder. Therapy is not surrender. Boundaries are not barbed wire. Forgiveness is not a coupon that never expires. A veteran of the heart would add, protect your peace. Someone else would say, choose the life that chooses you back. I wrote that one down. Days passed. She texted to say she had started therapy. She said she had told her mother. She said she had told the man she left me for that the story was over, not a cliffhanger, not a pivot into a spin-off. She did not ask to meet. She did not beg for an answer. She used sentences that paid full price, subject and verb sharp and accountable. I noticed the difference, the way one notices a new honesty in a face that was always attractive but not always honest. My friends noticed too. Over beers in a backyard where the grill smoke braided with laughter, they gave me the chorus I expected, and the verse I did not. Do not let betrayal write your calendar. One said, remember what that house felt like when you were proud to unlock the door, another said. But also, a quiet one added, the point of growth is not to become a monument. It is to stay human. I met with a counselor who used phrases that sounded like they had been sanded smooth by years of sincere use. Attachment injuries, trust scaffolding, honest disclosure, repair attempts. We spoke about family drama, not the televised kind, but the kind where a child watches two adults try to be adults, and the child decides whether to keep the world or return it to customer service. I told the counselor I had always imagined forgiveness as a courtroom where someone bangs a gavel and says, fine, case dismissed. She said sometimes it is more like traffic, messy, negotiated, everyone using blinkers that half the drivers pretend not to see. I told her I was tired of metaphors. She laughed the way an expert laughs when the lab results are challenging but not hopeless. Bit by bit, I let my ex-wife into the daylight of my days. Coffee on a Saturday morning at a diner where the waitress calls the entire restaurant honey, where the pancakes are a patriotic act, a walk by the river where people run with dogs that look like they are applying for scholarships. We talked like two citizens of neighboring countries negotiating a border. She told stories about her year that curled my toes with anger and pity like a radio playing two stations at once. I told stories about my year that sounded respectable even to me. Promotions, healthier habits, a kitchen that no longer looked like the set of a crime show. We did not touch. We did not promise. We behaved as if the air between us had a job to do, and we were going to let it. There is a myth that forgiveness is the opposite of revenge. Sometimes forgiveness feels like the most advanced revenge, not against a person, but against the part of your life that wanted to keep you trapped in the amber of a bad moment. She said she understood if the only honest answer I could give was no. I said I was not smart enough to be definitive, but I was brave enough to be careful. The therapist would have been proud of that sentence. We decided on a project that had nothing to do with rings or vows. We volunteered at a Saturday food pantry where cans stacked like hope in boxes. There we passed pasta and cereal to people who never appear in the Reddit stories because their heroism is not dramatic enough to trend. After 2 weeks, I realized that rebuilding might require building something that was never there to begin with. And then, somewhere between the pantry and the river and the diner where syrup solves 90% of life, the story began to bend. The serious tone of the year did not vanish, but it loosened its necktie. Laughter reintroduced itself, the awkward kind that sneaks in at funerals and therapy sessions, already apologizing. One afternoon, she told me the neighbor had asked if we were back together, and she said, We are two people who have learned how to use adult words. We laughed. It felt like borrowing a car we used to own, marveling at the upgrades. If you are waiting for a grand gesture, you might be disappointed. American lives are rarely opera. They are marching bands getting the rhythm right in small-town parades. Now that you and I have behaved like respectable citizens and completed the solemn portion of this saga, permit me to report that the universe has a sense of humor and a fondness for parody that would make late-night writers applaud. The first odd thing happened at the food pantry during a canned goods inventory that had the energy of a low-budget heist film. A volunteer with a Bluetooth headset announced that the internet had noticed our block. Apparently, a neighbor had posted a meticulously edited saga of our marriage to a forum that resembles a carnival, a courthouse, and a church potluck all at once. The title was not subtle. Cheating wife left husband, comes back crying, he makes her earn it. Am I wrong to root for him? Within hours, a familiar crowd had gathered. Reddit Betrayal Diaries, Cheating Wife Reddit, the whole commentariat with their annotated empathy and folding chairs of judgment. Our ordinary penance had been optioned by the midnight studio system. At first I felt exposed, then ridiculous, then oddly amused, the way you laugh when a grocery store speaker plays your breakup song and you are holding organic kale. She looked mortified. I told her that if America insists on turning family stories into national programming, we might as well insist on writing our own captions. We posted a joint comment that read like a cease and desist from two people who had once majored in literature and minored in poor choices. We said the story was real, but the ending was not for sale. The commenters were surprisingly human in their replies. A few apologized. A few asked for updates, like we were a show with a release schedule. One person wrote, "The real glow-up is when people in betrayal stories refuse to be only what they suffered." Someone else wrote, "If you two figure out boundaries, please publish the map." That should have been the end of the internet subplot, but the algorithm has the manners of a dog left alone with a charcuterie board. One night, I dreamt I was summoned to a cosmic courtroom where the judges were avatars wearing laurel wreaths made of Wi-Fi signals. The bailiff had a username I could not pronounce and an upvote gavel. Case 7003-1992, intoned the presiding MOD. The People of Relationship Stories versus Human Complication. My ex-wife sat beside me in a witness box shaped like a shared couch. A choir of notifications hummed. The prosecution read aloud the greatest hits of our worst days. The defense quoted the small mercies. At one point, the court stenographer, who looked suspiciously like our old barista, raised her hand and asked if anyone else smelled pancakes. The MOD nodded gravely. "We do," she said, "and we will consider that smell in our verdict." I woke laughing in the dark, and for once the laughter did not feel like a trespass against my grief. The conspiracy part arrived with the mail, which is the most American way for a conspiracy to arrive. An envelope with no return address. Inside it, a photocopy of a page from a self-published book called The Algorithm is My Shepherd. The chapter was highlighted. If you want your ex to forgive you, seed 7 sincere stories of repentance into 7 different corners of the internet. The digital saints will intercede. I showed it to her, and she rolled her eyes so hard the room gained an extra ceiling. We joked that perhaps the angels now carry smartphones. We joked that perhaps free will comes with terms and conditions. When you have been through a year like ours, the only appropriate response to weirdness is better weirdness. We decided to plant 7 sincere acts of kindness in the actual town instead. 7 lawn mows for elderly neighbors, 7 bags of groceries for families in need, 7 handwritten notes to teachers who did not give up on difficult children long before the state was willing to notice them. The town did not trend. The town did glow. Of course, there was a fantasy beat too, because once your life has been consumed by the midnight carnival, a little magic feels like civic restitution. It happened on a Tuesday with the clarity of a textbook. We were sitting on the same porch where the year's first scene played, the light gone honey thick, when a monarch butterfly decided we were two respectable pieces of furniture. It landed on the rim of her water glass and rode the tiny tremors of her breath as if it had paid for a luxury cruise. She froze, a careful statue of a woman who had learned that stillness can be a prayer. In the minute that followed, the world conducted a master class on gentle recalibration. I have no conclusion to report. I have only this. The butterfly did not fly away because of panic. It left because of completion. We built rituals that looked silly from far away and sacred from up close. On Wednesdays, we made grilled cheese and told one true thing from a childhood that we had never said aloud. On Fridays, we walked downtown and pretended we were tourists, which forced us to see the courthouse and the diner, and the faded mural, as if we had just arrived and might stay. On Sundays, we traded book recommendations the way teenagers trade stickers. People kept asking if we were back together. We are practicing radical competence, I would say, which is not the answer anyone wants for their gossip scrapbook. But it made us smile, and sometimes the right smile is a treaty. Inside this increasingly satirical, slightly enchanted America, we discovered a secret that should be printed on cereal boxes. Pain turns you into a better audience for other people's stories. The woman at the grocery store whose hands never stop moving because if they stop, she might cry. The teenager at the library who makes an extra trip back to thank the librarian for not shushing him. The veteran at the bus stop who tells jokes like they are sandbags. Suddenly, you hear their paragraphs. Your ribs stop acting like a vault and start acting like a bell. You realize that most relationship stories in this country do not end with fireworks or court. They end with someone doing the dishes and someone else finally hearing the apology. You have waited politely for the last door to open, for the line after the comma in the title, for the "and I" that the internet keeps demanding as if a person's life is a trailer begging for a July release. Here it is, unglamorous and exact. My wife cheated, I walked away, a year later. She returned in tears, and I did not perform revenge. I did not propose on a jumbotron. I did not hand her a notarized certificate of absolution with the governor's seal. I did not craft a speech designed to win the late-night highlight reel. I chose the stubborn choreography of repair, which looks unimpressive in photographs and spectacular in person. Repair meant telling the full truth without dressing it for company. It meant describing the night I stood in a parking lot holding my car keys like a weapon against the part of me that wanted to drive to his apartment. It meant hearing her narrate the exact minute she realized a certain kind of excitement was simply a bad electrician's spark, all bright and wrong. It meant accounting, real accounting, where money and calendars and phones were placed on a table and asked to testify. It meant naming griefs without hiring them as decorators. It meant that when the old shame walked into the room, we nodded and said, "You can sit in the corner, but you will not direct this scene." Repair meant lawyering up with boundaries and signing the treaty with courage. We built calendars that included therapy first and fun second, not because we are doer, but because we are honest about how roofs keep out rain. We wrote private vows in plain language and taped them inside the kitchen cabinet where the cereal lives, so breakfast would remind us that promises feed you only if you serve them daily. We agreed that any whiff of secrecy would trigger a fire drill. Phones on the table, voices measured, no shouting, no walking out, no theatrics, except the applause we give each other for doing the steady work. If you came looking for the vocabulary of family revenge, know this. Our most radical revenge was building a home that betrayal could not breathe in. Weeks turned into a season. We were not dramatic. We were accurate. Autumn came in with its brass section, and with it a dozen small tests that romances rarely advertise. the ex's birthday shadow, the awkward holiday invitation that looks like a legal document drafted by ghosts, the random Tuesday where melancholy insists on being the guest of honor. We passed most of them. We failed a few. On the nights we failed, we did not post. We made tea. We told the patient truth. If you think that sounds boring, you have not lived through chaos. Boring is the spa. Here is where the conspiracy theorists in the peanut gallery will demand an angle, a twist, a secret inheritance, or a hidden child, or a courtroom scene featuring the phrase, "Husband refuses to sign birth certificate." I will disappoint them with the confession that our plot twist is an absence. We chose not to turn ourselves into content. We chose to be a family in rehearsal, a tiny troupe performing bravery in an unremarkable house, on an unremarkable street, in an unremarkable town, where the extraordinary thing is that neighbors wave and the mail arrives and you can smell pancakes if the wind is ambitious. You want closure. I do too, but I think closure is a museum myth. What we have instead is practice. We practice the loyalty that says, "I will not leave the room just because it is suddenly hard to breathe here." We practice the humility that says the other person's story is not a prosecution, but a geography you must learn to read. We practice the comedy of ordinary life, the in-jokes and goofy dances, and the way we narrate the dog's inner monologue with award-season seriousness. We practice the refusal to make a throne out of our worst day. We practice gratitude for the mundane. A gas tank filled, a light bulb changed, a hand reached out in the middle of the night not because of fear, but because of memory. And yet, because this is America and I am a narratively responsible citizen, I will offer a finale, not an ending. At the pantry Christmas party, the director handed out certificates that looked like checks from a game show. Ours read, with endearing stationary drama, "For services rendered to the common good under conditions of mild internet fame." Everyone clapped. Someone shouted, "Kiss already!" We laughed. Later, on the walk home under a sky that was rehearsing for New Year's, she squeezed my hand and asked if I ever wished for the simpler version of our life, the one where the worst thing that happened in a week was the garbage truck coming early. I told her no and yes. No, because that version of me was asleep with his eyes open. Yes, because simplicity is a vacation, and who does not love the thought of a beach where nobody knows your search history? We turned the corner, and our little house looked like a patient in the ICU who had noticed the nurse whispering, "Finally stable." Inside, the photo from our wedding stood next to a newest photo, the two of us on the pantry steps, hair messy, eyes clear, holding a sign that said, "Open 9/12, love is a verb." It is possible to live without being a headline. It is possible to forgive without pretending amnesia. It is possible to love again without telling the first love it never hurt you. We are not an easy moral, not a cautionary tale, not a trailer for a show you will binge. We are a pair of people who chose to do something scandalous in a culture that prefers fireworks to foundations. We stayed. And for the archivists of the midnight forums, the ones who will archive this saga among the infidelity stories and betrayal stories and family drama stories and all the other loud, crowded libraries, here is my update. My wife cheated. I walked away. A year later. She returned in tears, and I built a life where trust does not need a spotlight to be real. If you require a tag, let it be this: quiet repair. If you require a genre, call it relationship stories with a civic imagination. If you require a moral, it is older than the internet and younger than tomorrow. Tell the truth. Do the dishes. Water the plant. Answer the door only when the person outside has learned how to knock with their whole heart.